College football is a geographical nightmare. Realignment has shattered the landscape with the Big Ten, Big 12, and SEC acquiring a combined 10 new teams last season. For the past year, all eyes have been on the ACC for the next big shift, sparked by lawsuits against the league by Florida State and Clemson. The Athletic obtained internal emails between decision makers at North Carolina, a key domino in potential future realignment, and one mysterious phrase keeps popping up: the Carolina Blue Matter. What is it? We went to the Athletic's UNC insider Brendan Marks to uncover the truth behind the code word that could hint at the next big target of realignment. Brendan, you and Matt Baker got the documents and wrote the story. How did you learn about this, the Carolina Blue Matter, and what exactly is it?
Yeah, so obviously the receipts sort of tell the story, and it started out with Matt Baker and I putting in a couple of different public records requests and basically finding a couple of loose threads that all seem to add up to the same place. Obviously, North Carolina had contacted this law firm in the past, Skadden. They dealt with them back during the academic scandal in the mid-2010s. And prior to this engagement, that was the only time these law firm had ever worked with North Carolina before. So we have this initial engagement letter from 2022. We have an email from the chairman of the board of trustees saying, hey, we want to get out. The document was produced in response to our request for anything related to realignment. So we knew we were already sniffing down the right hole. And then we get the email to corroborate it. We talked to a couple of sources behind the scenes, and lo and behold, this murky continuing charge of the Carolina Blue Matter turns out to be the not so secret code name for North Carolina as it's looking into conference realignment and what its different options are.
In an email exchange from April 2024 between John Pryor, the chairman of the UNC Board of Trustees, and former trustee Chuck Duckett, Duckett writes, "We have a landing spot if things blow up." How true do you think that is?
Oh, I think it's 100% true. I mean, other than Notre Dame, I think you could make the argument, and you talk to former TV executives, you talk to people throughout the industry, North Carolina is probably the most valuable non-Notre Dame domino left in the realignment board. Just when you're talking about the brand, when you're talking about the geographic proximity, North Carolina could work with the SEC. North Carolina could work with the Big Ten. Obviously, you talk about the academic prestige. It's one of the top public research universities in the entire country. The football program, I don't know if you guys have heard, hired a certain notable football coach in December. So certainly that makes them a little bit more attractive. And then the men's basketball program, even though it's been struggling of late, is still one of the most prestigious blue bloods in the country. So there is everything there that makes North Carolina attractive. I don't know that it would be quite a bidding war from the SEC and the Big Ten to add them, but when we're talking about the realignment landscape and you look at the schools who have made moves so far, I mean, the fact that you're not getting full shares for places like a UCLA or USC, the fact that some of that is an Oregon, a Washington, the fact that schools like that are not coming in as full shares, like North Carolina is one of those that I think potentially would bring enough value where it could get in at that level. Obviously, the grant of rights is a little bit prohibitive in terms of them making that move. But were the ACC to have some sort of existential crisis, North Carolina, in my opinion, is 1A on everybody's board of who are we calling first to try to get in our league.
Florida State and Clemson have both expressed their grievances about the ACC's lackluster TV deal, and they have sued to try to get out of the grant of rights. UNC did not. But Duckett wrote in an email you guys obtained, "Let FSU and Clemson pay the attorneys and see what happens. We'll all learn via their expense." Is that your sense of the situation? Basically, let FSU and Clemson fight the battle and UNC can follow and whatever happens?
100%. And I would imagine that you could probably do some version of this story at almost every school in the ACC. If a school is not doing this sort of due diligence behind the scenes, the fact of the matter is, I would say that's almost negligence at this point, given how unstable the landscape is. And consider, North Carolina started this process back in September of 2022. So that's about 14 months after Oklahoma and Texas sort of kick off this latest wave of realignment. It's about 3 months after USC and UCLA announced their move. This is right at the most unstable portion of realignment when everybody, everything is changing hands. This is when North Carolina started this process. And yeah, 100%. They obviously, when we're talking about the billing matter, half of the total expenses for this Carolina Blue Matter came from January 2024 to April of 2024. That is the period that directly coincides with immediately following Florida State and the ACC getting into a lawsuit, Clemson and the ACC getting into a lawsuit, and the North Carolina school system basically taking back some of the power from the university at large, so that North Carolina can't, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill specifically, cannot make this unilateral decision that, hey, we're leaving the ACC. Too bad if you guys want us to stick around or whatever. So when you put all of that together, they're spending the most money during the most unstable portion of time. And yet what they spent in that time still pales in comparison to what Florida State and Clemson have spent on legal fees and court proceedings and everything else. So my understanding, and speaking to sources, is that this was a move that everyone described as due diligence. North Carolina was never making some aggressive legal ploy a la Clemson or Florida State to leave the ACC. However, if Clemson or Florida State had had a little bit more success in the courtroom, I think it's a situation where North Carolina maybe would have continued that billing. Potentially, we would have seen athletic director Bubba Cunningham and everybody over in Chapel Hill press the big red button. Obviously, it never got to that matter with Clemson and Florida State, and so it never did with North Carolina either.
ESPN did recently pick up the TV deal option through 2036, but those Florida State and Clemson lawsuits are still ongoing. What is the state of the ACC right now? What is the relationship with the conference members? Do you see an end point to those legal fights coming?
Yeah, so everybody had sort of circled that February look-in or option pickup in February as this is where we're going to know much more concretely one way or the other whether the ACC is going to endure or whether there is an option for there to be a jailbreak. And with the ACC and ESPN opting to continue their deal for ESPN to pick it up, it basically signals that everything is going to be gridlocked. And so if you're Clemson and if you're Florida State, this look-in period was really an opportunity as much as anything. Think about it. How much money has Clemson and Florida State spent legally trying to look at their options to get out of the ACC? Millions and millions of dollars. They're continuing to rack up legal fees. The attorneys always win in these situations. Thus far, they have had no concrete or tangible success in terms of actually making headway towards getting out of the ACC. Nor has there been any interest from the SEC or the Big Ten in potentially adding either of those two schools. The SEC already has markets in South Carolina, already has markets in Florida. How additive would Clemson and Florida State be at this point? And there hasn't been a ton of interest. So if you're Clemson and Florida State, you've already got a sunk cost of millions of dollars. You have not had anybody give you a roast so far in the realignment like Bachelor Edition. And now you're kind of back to the ACC going, well, at least we get an option to look at this deal. Maybe this isn't our best shot. And I think that's the reality of where we are with the ACC right now. This look-in option, if you ask people close to the ACC, people close to ESPN, this was an option for the ACC and ESPN to try and make the most of what is still a below-market deal. But the question going in on the ACC side was, can we make this more beneficial for both of us? Can it be a situation where we potentially earn a little bit more money and you potentially give us a little bit more exposure? The ACC is saying, hey, why can't we have some of these primetime, TV spots on your main networks rather than being relegated to ACC network? Why can't we potentially split some of our revenue based on and how we distribute it based on branding and based on TV viewership? Those are things that obviously appeal to Clemson and Florida State. And so as this option has now been officially picked up, I think in the coming months, maybe even the coming weeks, you're going to see these discussions start to ramp up about Florida State and Clemson not rejoining the ACC because they never left, but coming back into the fray more fully as partners because realistically they don't have another option. And I think both those schools realize now that the option has been picked up, we're in this for the long haul. We might as well try and make the most of it.
Everyone has pointed to 2030-ish as the next time things could blow up in conference realignment. That's when the Big Ten deal is up. It's around when the SEC deal is up. But the ACC to this point is still locked in through 2036. Where do you see UNC in 5 years? And if this current flare-up eventually cools down, do you think we're going to kind of be in the same boat, 5 years from now?
Yeah, it's a fascinating situation because if you're North Carolina, you hope you are not in the same position in 5 years as you are now. North Carolina, again, I go back to this Belichick hire, and we've talked about it, but how significant that's going to factor into the conference realignment landscape is something I don't know that we're talking about enough. Like, North Carolina is taking Reaganomics, trickle-down economics, and applying it to its athletic department. North Carolina is betting big, putting all the chips in the center of the table and saying, look, Bill Belichick is going to be so successful in football that not only is that going to be able to subsidize the rest of our athletic programs, it's going to make us attractive enough that when the landscape becomes unstable again, we are going to be a much more attractive power than they already are, which is, I would argue, the most attractive non-Notre Dame program left on the board. So where do I think North Carolina actually is in 5 years? You know, if Bill Belichick wins, if he's still there, who knows? His deal is only guaranteed for the first 3 years. You know, his son could be the head coach. They could have moved in an entirely different direction by then. But if he takes North Carolina's football program into a new stratosphere and men's basketball continues to operate at its current pace and the rest of the athletic department and the brand continues to be what it is now, in 5 years' time, if there is an opportunity for North Carolina to jump ship, I think it's something that at that point might move beyond the Carolina Blue matter, might move beyond this due diligence into something that the athletic department, the board of trustees, and the highest possible powers in Chapel Hill have to consider seriously making a move.
Brendan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
North Carolina could be at the epicenter of the next great conference realignment earthquake, and the Carolina Blue matter shows that UNC isn't waiting around. Will the college football world continue to fracture? Time will tell. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. It's cost-free and helps us immensely. Check out Brendan Marks and the work of the entire college football and college basketball staffs at The Athletic. From Chris Vanini, thank you for watching.